Welcome to the Explainer. So, I hear you loud and clear. Your exam on the Malaysian administrative system is in exactly 3 days, and you need to master Chapter 3 like yesterday. Well, take a deep breath because you are in exactly the right place. I'm going to guide you through a highly structured, rapid fire masterclass on the system of decentralization as it's practiced in Malaysia. By the end of this, you'll have absolutely everything you need to ace those essay questions. Okay, let's dive right into this. Seriously, put down that massive 500-page textbook for a second. We're going to lock down the core concepts, the legal frameworks, and the practical examples you actually need to prove to your examiner that you truly understand how local power works in Malaysia. Here's our battle plan for today. We'll start by defining decentralization. Then we'll compare devolution versus deconcentration. After that, we'll look at why we decentralize, the role of the district officer, and finally, who actually controls local government. Section 1, Defining Decentralization. Let's look at this grand umbrella term before we get too deep into the weeds. So, in the Malaysian context, decentralization isn't just one single thing. According to scholars like Maddock, back in 1966, and Brian Smith, decentralization is really an umbrella term that consists of two distinct halves, devolution and deconcentration. Both of these involve delegating power and functions to lower levels of government to make service delivery more effective, sure, but they do it in completely different ways. Now, what's really interesting here is the textbook definition of devolution. This is the real deal. It's the central government's formal transfer of administrative and financial decision-making authority to local governments. These aren't just, field offices. They have clear, legally recognized jurisdictions, and they're fully accountable to the constituents they provide public services for. Basically, think of them as autonomous entities created by law. All right, Section 2, Devolution versus Decentralization. You'll want to shift into high gear here, because this is prime exam territory. Let's aggressively contrast these two concepts side by side. For devolution, formal powers are transferred through an act of parliament. These bodies are legal entities, literal body corporates that can sue, be sued, and make their own local policies. Now, flip to decentralization. This is just a delegation of authority to agents of the central or state governments out in the field. These agents don't have specific financial or administrative powers. They're essentially just there to execute policies decided by the higher-ups. Think of devolution as like moving out and getting your own bank account, whereas decentralization is just your parents handing you a grocery list and their credit card. You're just running their errands. Seriously, take a mental snapshot of this exact matrix right now. These are the 5 specific powers that decentralized bodies totally lack compared to devolved local governments. Number 1, no financial autonomy. They completely rely on federal or state budgets, no revenue of their own. 2, no administrative autonomy. They literally can't hire or fire their own staff. That's done by commissions. 3, they are not a body corporate, meaning you have to sue the state, not them. 4, they only implement higher policies. They don't make their own. And 5, they cannot make their own bylaws, unlike actual local governments. Just to add a bit more detail, deconcentration actually splits into 2 specific flavors. First, you've got prefectorial deconcentration. A perfect example of this is the district office, where the district officer acts as a general provider for land and community services requested by the state. The second flavor is functional deconcentration. This refers to agencies providing one very specific service. So think of the National Registration Department, the Public Works Department, or the Health Department. Moving right along to Section 3. Why do we decentralize? We know what decentralization is, but what's the theoretical why behind it all? Why wouldn't the central government just run the whole show from Putrajaya? Well, there are 6 fantastic reasons you can drop right into your exam essay. First, it reduces Putrajaya's massive burden and speeds up local decision-making. Plus, needs vary wildly, right? I mean, Kota Balud's rural needs are totally different from Petaling Jaya's urban demands. Decentralizing also sparks initiative among lower-level officials, promotes political education by making the government feel less remote, and finally, it encourages political pluralism, which keeps the central government from becoming overwhelmingly powerful. Section 4. The district officer's role. Let's look at the human element and the absolute cornerstone of local administration. This role has evolved significantly over time. Before World War II, the district officer was primarily a magistrate and a collector of land revenue. But post-independence, that revenue collection role kind of took a back seat, and they became heavily involved in on-the-ground development and security. Today, depending on where you are, a DO is usually a senior federal officer from the Elite Administrative and Diplomatic Service, or PT. Although, in places like Sabah, Sarawak, and former unfederated Malay states like Kedah, they actually come from the state civil service. So, what does a DO actually do all day? Well, they administer land matters and collect land taxes. They act as a highly influential model supervisor in their district. They serve as the ultimate prefect or coordinator for development planning, acting as the boots on the ground to implement massive government policies like Vision 2020. And crucially, they're the bridge between the people and the state, channeling local community complaints directly to the state authority. Okay, Section 5. Who controls local government? With all these different layers we've talked about, who actually pulls the strings at the local level? Constitutionally speaking, the answer is the state. You'll definitely want to highlight this in your notes. Local government is exclusively under the state list. Under Item 4 in List 2 of the Ninth Schedule of the Federal Constitution, all local authorities fall under the exclusive jurisdiction of the state governments. The states determine the programs and policies. The only exceptions here are the local governments in Kuala Lumpur, Labuan, and Putrajaya, because those fall under federal territories. But here is where it gets a little tricky for your exam. Even though states have jurisdiction, the federal government still exerts massive indirect control. They do this mainly through two bodies, the National Council for Local Government, or NCLG, and the Ministry of Housing and Local Government, the MHLG, which was established in 1964. See, because local governments are often financially weak, they rely pretty heavily on federal grants. This financial reliance naturally opens the door for indirect federal oversight, which ultimately drives national uniformity. Let's look at the NCLG. It's essentially a high-level forum chaired by the Prime Minister or Deputy Prime Minister. Its main job is to legislate national policy for local government development, advise both federal and state governments on related laws, and crucially, create that uniformity of policy and law across the whole country. They meet at least once a year, and the decisions made here are actually binding on both federal and state governments. Well, with the exceptions of Sabah and Sarawak, of course. Now, the state also exercises direct legal control over devolved local governments, specifically through the Local Government Act of 1976. And this brilliantly illustrates how that control is divided. Financially, the state holds the purse strings. Sections 39, 41, and 55 basically mean the state has to approve their revenues, loans, and budgets. Administratively, Sections 3, 10, and 102 mean the state controls their status, hires counselors, and can veto any bylaws the local government tries to pass. And here's a final surprise fact you can weave into your answer. State control isn't just about money and hiring. It's also about land. Under the Town and Country Planning Act of 1976, local authorities are legally mandated to prepare a structure plan showing land use every 5 years. And yep, you guessed it, this major plan requires the explicit approval of the state authority before it can actually be implemented. So we've covered the definitions, the absolutely vital difference between devolution and decentralization, the role of the DOE, and that complex web of federal and state control. So I'm going to leave you with this mock practice question straight from your syllabus. Differentiate two major forms of decentralization at the local level. 20 marks. Could you answer it right now? Just think back to the autonomous legal entity versus the delegated agent. You completely have the knowledge now to crush this paper. Best of luck on your exam. In 3 days, you are going to do great.